my name is Lauren Lindemeyer, and today I'll be doing my midterm presentation on the triple jump during the jump phase. So the triple jump is broken down into a few parts. We're going to have the approach, the hop, the step, the jump, which is going to be our focus today, and the landing. So let's break this down. There's going to be a few different phases, so we're going to start with phase one, which is going to have the hips flex, the knees also flex, the ankle is going to dorsiflex, the muscle lengthens eccentrically to absorb force. The takeoff phase, aka the propulsion phase, the hip extends, the knee extends, the ankle is going to plantar flex, which is going to cause explosive concentric contractions that produce force. And then during phase three, it's going to be the flight phase. So the flight phase is going to have the hip flexion of the swing leg, the core is going to stabilize the posture, and you're going to see minimum lower limb force production. So during the movement, the athlete is going to be performing a triple extension, which of the hip, knee, and ankle, and at the same time, the opposing leg is going to swing forward and the arms are going to move upwards to increase momentum. The athlete is going to then leave the ground and enters the flight phase just before landing. So the purpose of the movement is going to be to generate maximal vertical and horizontal force to increase jump height and distance. So this movement is going to follow the biomechanical principles such as force production, torque generation, like impulse, and the stretch shortening cycle. All right. So we're going to have a few different muscles involved with this. To start off, we're going to have the quadriceps, the gastrocs, the gluteus maximus, and the hamstring group. So the quadriceps are going to originate at the femoral and pelvis. It's going to insert at the tibial tuberosity. Its actions are going to be the knee extension, and it's an agonist. So the gastrocnemius or gastroc is going to origin at the femur. It's going to insert at the calcaneus, aka the Achilles tendon. It's going to have an action of plantar flexion, and it's an agonist. The gluteus maximus is going to origin at the posterior ilium and the sacrum. It's going to insert at the gluteotuberosity of the femur, and its actions are going to be hip extension, and it is also an agonist. Lastly, we're going to have our hamstrings group. Again, we're just going with groups for this because there are a significant amount of muscles inside the hamstrings group. So we're going to have, it's going to originate at the ischial tuberosity. It's going to insert at the tibia and fibula. Its actions are going to be as a synergist and a stabilizer. Okay. So now we're going to get into the joints that are involved. So to start off, we have the hip joint, which is going to be a ball and socket joint, and it's going to be working with the flexion and extension of the leg. So we have the knee joint, which is a hinge joint, and it's going to, again, be working with the flexion extension of the leg to be able to produce that force. You're going to have the ankle, which is also known as the talocrural. That's a hinge joint, and it's going to be working with the dorsal flexion and plantar flexion. More plantar flexion than dorsal flexion for this movement. And lastly, we're going to have the sacroiliac, which is a plane type of joint. It's going to be offering stability and force transfer in between the spine and the lower body. So we're going to have a few different phases here. We're going to have the loading, the takeoff, and the flight. So during the loading phase, you're going to see the gluteus maximus, the gastrocnemius, and a hamstring group are going to have to eccentrically contract to be able to produce that force for them to be able to hit that ground and then start to be able to bounce off. So then you're going to have the takeoff phase, which is going to be the concentric contraction of the gluteus maximus and the hamstring group. Okay, and lastly, we're going to have the flight phase. During the flight phase, it's exactly as it sounds. You are literally in the air flying. It's very, very difficult for any of your muscles to really move during this phase. So there's not really going to be any muscles contracting during this phase. So now we're going to break it down into the functional anatomy analysis. So we're going to have the force velocity curve, which shows that explosive movements produce high force at high contraction velocity, which is going to maximize power. So this means that when something is eccentrically contracting, aka it's going outwards like a punch, then it's going to be fast But because it's fast and it's stretching, that means it's going to produce a lot of velocity and a lot of force. And also it's going to have a really high risk of injury. But if something is concentric contracting, which is slow, it's going to have like a bicep curl going upwards. It's going to have a very slow but controlled amount of force, which is actually instead going to increase the amount of force that it produces. And if something's isometric, then there is force being produced, but at the same time, there's no velocity being produced. So then from there, we're going to look at the force velocity curve, which shows that if something is very, very slow, but it has a lot of force, it's going to be max strength. But if something is going to be very, very fast with little bits of force, then it's going to be very speedy. So for this movement, we're really going to be focusing on power, which is the in between velocity and force. Next up, we're going to have the analysis of the stretch shortening cycle. So during ground contact, the muscles eccentrically load elastic energy. This energy is then released during the concentric contraction, increasing force and power output. So as you can see right now, the stretch shortening cycle is actually taking place as that athlete is making contact in the first picture of the athlete moving. So as the toe touches down into eccentric contraction, it's going to be absorbing that force. And then during the memorization phase, that potential energy that is caused by absorbing that force is going to be transferred into kinetic energy. And then during that concentric movement, then that is going to be turned into kinetic energy. During the memorization phase, if it lasts too long, then you will actually lose heat because of heat dissipation. So instead of the potential energy being turned into kinetic energy, it will be instead turned into heat energy. So next up, we have the length-tension relationship. This means that the optimal muscle length allows for maximal force production during like hip and knee extension for the jump phase. So what this shows is that force is directly proportional to sacroiliac length. So if force and sacroiliac length are good, then you're going to have a very strong movement. But if the sacroiliac length is too long, then you're not going to be able to produce a lot of force and you're going to be risking a lot of injury. So as you can see from the purple and yellow diagrams, those are actually going to represent the actin and myosin. So as you can see, if the actin is too close and the myosin is too close, then it's going to be really hard for you to produce force. If the actin and myosin are perfect, which means that they're kind of open but not fully, it's going to be showing that it can produce a lot of force and it's going to have the perfect contraction length. But if you were to say hyperextend your leg, it's going to be really difficult for you to produce that force because of how far apart the actin is away from the myosin. So we're going to go over the required range of motion of each of the involved joints. This is because without these ranges of motion, you can get injured, you won't be able to produce as much force, and you will not be able to safely do this exercise, which is, again, the jump phase of the triple jump. So the proximal ranges are going to be for hip extension, it's going to be about 10 to 20 degrees. For knee extension, you want it to be 0. So you won't be able to fully extend your leg without hyperextending it, which would be something like a -5. Because if you were able to hyperextend it due to that stretch shortening cycle that we just talked about, you would not be able to produce enough force. We're going to have your ankle plantar flexion, which is going to be 20 to 30 degrees, and your hip flexion of your swing leg, which is not the leg that you're taking off with, but the leg that you're swinging back to gain momentum with, is going to be 60 to 90 degrees, because again, you're going to be having to move that through almost a full range of motion to generate that additional momentum to propel you into the sandpit. So your primary muscles, not including the hamstrings because those are the synergists, and the stabilizers, are going to be your gluteus maximus, your quadriceps group, and the gastrocnemius. So this is going to have, as you can see from the image, this is showing exactly where the muscles are at. So that way you can better understand exactly how these muscles need to contract. So this is all done in the sagittal plane. And during this exercise, you need to be elastic, extensible, and contractilable. So elasticity, it just means like allowing the recoil to help the stretch shortening cycle, because if your muscles cannot react to the stretch shortening cycle, such as the actin and myosin, they are too far apart from each other, you're not going to be able to produce the same amount of force as you would if they were closer together. You need to be able to safely move through the motion. So you can't have your muscle be like super, super tight either. So you have to be elastic, but not super elastic. But at the same time, you can't have it super, super short. Because if it's too short, then you can't safely move through the action or movement, which is going to result in pain, injury, and loss of power. And then you have your contractility, which creates the force production, aka it's your muscles flexing against your bone to create that movement, which then from there creates that force. So let's get into the biomechanical principle evaluation. We're going to have a few things. We're going to have the movement arm, the torque, and the levers. So the movement arm is going to be the moving component of the exercise. So for example, we're going to have a second class lever, which is part of our exercise, but it's not the one that we're focusing on right now. A second class lever is going to have the effort on one side, the load in the center, and then the fulcrum, as you can see from the chart, on the other. This is going to result in the body weight actually being the main issue for this exercise. So then from there, we have torque. So torque is going to be force times the movement arm. For example, if you have a quadricep and it's able to produce 1,500 newtons of force, and you have your movement arm or moment arm, which is 0.04 meters long, aka a very short quadricep, that's going to result in 1,500 times 0.04, which would give you 60 Newton meters of torque. Now, for this, we were not focusing on the second class lever, but we were focusing on the third class lever of the jump, aka how the swing leg is contracting to create that momentum inside the air. So that means that the fulcrum is going to be the joint that it's affecting, aka that's going to be like the main force area that's taking the load. As you can see, because the load is so much farther away from the fulcrum. And then the effort is going to be the force that the muscles are producing. And then the load, again, it's going to be the body weight. So the force vectors for the overall movement are going to be a few different things. We have ground force reactions, we have gravity, we have upwards force, and we had forwards force. So ground force reactions is how much force you put on the ground puts back on you. Gravity is always present. I believe it is 9.81 meters per second that the Earth is constantly pushing down on us. You're going to have the upwards force, which is going to be resulting from the athlete pushing hard downwards, which is going to result in the force pushing upwards instead, aka the force pushing upwards, and then the forward force. This is caused because, as you saw from the previous image, the ankle is going to have a certain level of an angle, which is going to result in the force going forwards, while at the same time the force is pushing backwards. This is due to like a shear force. So in friction, which is going to, instead of keeping you in the same place, it's going to propel you forward. We have internal versus external forces. So internal, it's just going to be your muscles contracting against the bone and themselves. But the external for this movement is going to be the gravity and the ground reaction force. This is my beautiful force diagram. As you can see, you have friction of the foot on the ground on the left-hand side with an enhanced image. On the right-hand side, you can see that the body weight and gravity is pushing down, while the ground force reaction is pushing up towards this person's ankle because they are pushing down on it. So you can see it says the force of contraction because they're pushing down, but then the ground is reacting back up. So we're going to have some additional effects of forces, which includes the force systems, which is just combining the internal and external forces acting on the body during movement. You're going to have friction, which is the resistance between two surfaces in contact. As you can see from the image, this person's foot is making contact with the ground as well as their hands, creating friction. And then we have Newton's three laws of motion, which is going to have the first law: a body that is in motion is going to stay in motion. So if you are running, and then you stop running, like you stop contracting your muscles, you're going to keep on going because something that is in motion is going to stay in motion. And then force is going to equal mass times acceleration. So if you were to say quickly move through a motion by eccentrically contracting your leg, causing you to essentially jump forward, that's going to result in a significant reduction of force because it's not just your movement of you doing a running start into that movement, but it's also your mass as well. And then your third law is that ground force reaction force equals push force. So for triple jumpers, actually, they are able to produce 12 to 22 times their body weight in force, which means that if someone weighs, say, we're going to go easy with this, 100 pounds, they're producing over 1,200 pounds into the ground to have that massive 30-foot jump. So what is this going to mean? This is going to mean that triple jumpers need to be able to take that amount of force to their legs, unless they will quite frequently develop stress fractures, as well as multiskeletal issues, hip injuries, knee injuries, ankle injuries, simply because that's a lot of force for your body to be taking if it's not used to taking it. Then from there, we're going to go into kinematics. So we have the hip joint, the knee joint, the ankle joint, and then the hip joint again. So the hip joint, for the extension, we're going to have the gluteus maximus as the agonist, the hamstrings as the synergist, and its job is to extend the hip to drive the body upward and forward. The knee joint, which is the extension, it's going to have the quadriceps as the agonist. It's going to be straightening the knee to generate vertical force. The ankle joint, aka plantar flexion, it's going to have the gastrocnemius as the agonist and the soleus as the synergist, which then from there, it's going to be pushing the foot into the ground for the final propulsion, and the hip joint, aka flexion. So this is like your swing leg. So this is going to be your iliopathic, your rectus femoris, and your sartorius, aka pretty much your main quadriceps group, and some of your internal muscles as well. Well, this is going to be swinging the free leg forward to increase momentum and lift, because momentum is extremely important. Next up, we're going to have some injuries and exercises to help produce that force. As you can see, I performed a single leg box jump squat, a single leg jump onto a box. The box is about 20 inches tall, and this was done because during triple jump, you are using one leg only to be able to propel yourself forward. Well, studies have shown that by doing a single leg, your jump, you're able to produce more force than if you're using a bilateral leg, unless you have continuously trained that bilateral leg for several months in advance. And because of this, by training that single leg one at a time, you're able to maximize that force production. So you don't have to be training that bilateral leg. You should be training it, but you don't have to be training it to get the same results as quickly. Now we have a power clean. The power clean is being used because of how much force the triple jump can put on your body at once. So earlier I said it can put 12 to 22 times their body weight force onto their body again. And the only exercise, instead of a squat jump, which would also be putting a decent amount on force on their body, we decided to go with a power clean instead because it produces significantly more force, and because triple jumpers should be able to lift but about 170 times their weight. So once you get up to that in, say, a power clean, then you don't really have to train it any more than that to optimize your force production, but it does result in a decent amount of force being produced. And in conclusion, the jump phase of the triple jump involves the triple extension of the knee, hip, and ankle. This movement relies on the biomechanical principles such as torque and force production, ground force reaction, and the stress shortening cycle in particular. With proper strength, coordination, and technique, you can actually improve your performance while reducing injury risk. But by understanding the biomechanics, it helps us to optimize the movement, as well as athletic performance. Thank you very much and have a wonderful day.